Hi, good evening. Come on, welcome. Welcome to this late COP side event by Observatory do Clima. I am Isis Diniz, Communications Officer at the Institute for Energy and Environment, and I will be moderator tonight. Tonight, we are going to explore a benchmark for NDCs, the Global Stock Cake explicitly says the new NDC must be aligned to 1.5, but what does this mean? In Brazil, civil society has a concrete example. Observatory do Clima, Brazil's biggest NGO network dealing with climate policy, published in August a proposal for what the second Brazilian NDC could look like. We've been working on a role model NDCs since 2015. We were among the first civil society organizations in the world to write an NDC proposal for a country. This is the third time we did it. To explain the work and to tell you how does it compare with the official Brazilian NDC delivered last week here in Baku, we have a distinguished panel of specialists. David Tsai, leader of SIG, the Greenhouse Gas Emissions Estimate System. And Alencar, Science Director of Ipam, the Amazon Environment Research Institute. She will also present new data on the wildfires that ravaged Brazil this year. Gabriel Quintana, a researcher at Imaflora. Jarê Akiri, Executive Director of Climate Policy at Engajamundo. And Alexandre Prado, Leader of Climate Policy at WWF Brazil. David, you are the floor. You have the floor. You have.
Thank you, Isis. So, good evening, everybody. It's a pleasure to be here. So I will start by giving a little bit of the short story on the Brazilian emissions. As the Climate Observatory, as a network, it monitors the emissions, the Brazilian emissions, to evaluate if Brazil is walking on the path of decarbonization. We have been doing that for 12 years now through an initiative that is called SEEG, SIG, stands for System of Estimation of Greenhouse Gas Emissions. And inside the Climate Observatory, four member organizations are responsible for the technical work according to their thematic expertise. Three of them are here. So we have Ipam, responsible for land use change. We have Imaflora, responsible for agriculture. Iema, responsible for energy and industry. And Iclay, which is not here, responsible for the waste sector. So every year, we calculate and recalculate all of the time series of emissions. And the last collection that we launched 2 weeks ago, we have data presenting estimations until 2023. So we reproduce the methodology of the official inventory, which is based on the IPCC guidelines. And we also have some improvements that are meant both to follow the best of science and to stimulate that the government has also better and improved estimations. So what we see here in this graph is the synthesis result of the last collection of data. We see the Brazilian emissions from 1990 to 2023, annual emissions, and they are disaggregated into these colors that represents above zero the emissions from the five big sectors according to the IPCC. So green, the green color is land use change, where we find the deforestation rates. agriculture in yellow, energy, waste, and industrial processes and product use. So in general, we see a behavior of emissions that is typical of a developing country. So if we look at agriculture, energy, waste, and industrial processes in the four bottom colors, we see kind of a straight line going up that follows the population and the economic growth. But in Brazil, what gets our attention is that land use change because of deforestation. It functioned as a control volume of the overall emissions due to the size of the emissions that are due to the deforestation and the varying enforcement of deforestation control policies. In short, we have, before 2005, very high deforestation rates. Between 2005 and 2009, we can see there's a decrease, a very steep decrease on deforestation rates, and then because of that, emissions have decreased. 2009 was the year in which the Brazilian National Policy on Climate Change was published, and ironically, or contradictory, we had emissions increasing since 2009, as you can see on the graph. And that's because of the backlash on deforestation control measures, which peaked in the Bolsonaro's government between 2019 and 2022, as you can see on the graph. And the last data, the last year of data that we collected at Tsai, it shows us a little bit of hope because we had a 12% decrease on emissions in between 2022 and 2023. That was a decrease of emissions that was not seen since 2008. And that gives us, as we will see later, some hope to achieve the short-term climate target due to 2025. We can also see in this graph the removals in purple, the values below zero. They are due to protected areas and reforestation. And the black line is the net emissions, which are removals that are negative plus the gross emissions. And net emissions are the parameter that is used for evaluating the climate target. So, and these are just for us to get a sense of Brazil comparing to the world. So if we look at the emissions per capita, the total gross emissions per capita are very high. Today, we reach 11 tons of CO2 per capita. If we only account for net emissions, we have 8.1. And those two numbers are above the world average that is close to 6 tons of CO2 per capita, which is the number of Brazil if we exclude the deforestation from this accountability. So it means that Brazil is kind of average. If we didn't have deforestation, Brazil would be an average country in the world. Looking at economic intensity, we also don't see improvement in the last 20 years, 10, 20 years. And we are stuck on that green line if also we don't count for land use change and forestry. But if we count for land use change and forestry, so deforestation, we have increasing emissions are increasing faster than economy. So this year in August, the Climate Observatory published a proposal for the NDC, and this is structured as it is shown on the slide. I will be talking a little bit about the mitigation part. So the aim of the study was to build a fair NDC that would align to the Paris Agreement goal, which is to keep global temperature below 1.5 degrees. And for that, first, we did a top-down approach, which was to answer that question. What is the cap of emissions for Brazil in 2035 to contribute in a fair way to the trajectory compatible with 1.5? And that considering historical responsibility, national capacity, progressivity, and income, and also accounting for land use change emissions, which is an exercise that is not very common in this kind of fair share approach, because land use change emissions tend not to be very accurate. But we did this analysis together with we convened the climate equity reference calculator, which was able to use land use change emissions from SIG, and they calculated the reductions needed to this very challenging 87%, between 87% to 106% relative to 2005. So in 2035, we would have to cut emissions between 87% and 106%. That means virtually almost zeroing our emissions, or even be negative emissions. The second step was a bottom-up approach, where we gathered the SIGS team together with other organizations in the Climate Observatory to answer this question. So how should the Brazilian economy transform itself by 2035 to meet the emissions gap? So all of the organizations, they gathered what a vision of what policies should be applied to reach the lowest possible level of emissions, possible but viable, technically viable, to comply with that very challenging interval of almost getting to zero emissions. And very simplified, here are the pillars of this, the main premises of this building of this scenario. The first one is that Brazil will continue to develop, so increase in wealth, production will increase, consumption will also increase, pressuring for the activity data that creates emissions. And then the four pillars on mitigation, which first one, the most important one, is zero deforestation and recovery of all environmental liabilities. And Alencar will talk a little bit about that. Low carbon agriculture with carbon sequestration by the soil. Gabriel will talk a little bit about that. Energy transition away from fossil fuels. And that also has a premise that the world will also be transitioning, so that Brazil won't have much demand for producing fossil fuels. And that was backed up by a further study that I have here in my hand. It's called Future of Energy. And it can also be checked out in the Climate Observatory's website. And improvements in waste management. So the result was, if we look at this graph, we have emissions for 2005, 2022, 2030, and 2035, which are the targets. So we got to the proposed a 400 megatons cap for 2030 and 200 megatons cap for 2035, which means a reduction of 92% emissions relative to 2005, and then complying to that top-down requirement. Just very important methodological issue here is that here we are differing a little bit from the official accountability by not accounting for protected areas, as Annie will explain a little bit, but accounting for carbon soil, which is a great opportunity for removing atmospheric carbon in Brazil. which Gabriel will talk a little bit. And with that, I'll give the floor to Annie.
So thank you, David. Now I'm going to talk about the premises that we used for the land use change and forestry sector. So just a way to put in the context of our work, we use to calculate emissions in the land use sector, we use the land use change, burning forest residuals and soil organic carbon to calculate the gross emissions for land use change and forestry. And just for us to have an idea, deforestation itself is responsible for 98% of that part of gross CO2 equivalent emissions. So by saying that, we know we can see in the graph that shows the different contribution from our biomes. We can see that the Amazon biome it represents most of the gross CO2 emissions in Brazil, and responsible for 65% of the emissions in the entire country. And luckily we had a major reduction from 2022 to 2023, which helped a lot to reduce our emissions as the last SIG, as we published in the last SIG. Although the Amazon reduced, the Cerrado, for example, which is the second largest biome in Brazil, increased by 24%. But getting to the point of our exercise here is what we used as a target for the land use change and forestry sector. Basically, we assumed that we would have zero deforestation in Brazil in all biomes until 2030. But from there on, we assumed a residual annual deforestation of 1,000 square kilometers. So the zero there, it is between brackets, I mean, aspas, how to say, is commas, yeah, between commas, is because we will, assuming that we will still have a residual deforestation going on. We also include the forest code compliance of 20 million hectares that need to be restored according to our forest law. And also we didn't include that, but we also calculated what would be the impacts of like halting degradation in all biomes, which means basically by stopping like forest fires. It's very important in our sector because we deal with emissions from land use change, but we also deal with removals. And it's always important to make a point here of the role of protected areas in our accountability. Protected areas in Brazil are said as the managed forest, as accounted for anthropogenic removal. So all the forests inside the indigenous territories and conservation units, which are our protected areas, are accounted as, how can I say, sink, so has a factor of removal. And we didn't want to include that in our NDC. Because there are uncertainties about these removals, and also because really there is no real change in the CO2 flows to actually capturing that. So as we'll see after, some of these forests have been burned, and we have to account for that as well. But so it wouldn't be fair just to account for the removals. So we just decided not to include that. Just to go straight away to the results. So we have the historical deforestation, the historical emissions, CO2 emissions for land use change as a the red line, and the dotted line is the projection according to the assumptions that we said before, which would be zero deforestation by 2030 with 1,000 square kilometer per year. And the same thing, and then also including the removals based on the compliance with the forest code. And by that, we would have in 2030 about 450 megatons of CO2 equivalent as a net emissions. One thing that I want to bring here, which we think is very important, is that forest fires are not accounted in this accountability, but we think it's a very important thing, and we need to somehow advocate for people to look at that. So in the last SIG, we published from 2022 to 2023, if we account for all the native vegetation in Brazil that were affected by forest fires, discounting 50% of the area burned in the Cerrado and Pantanal, which maybe can burn in as a natural process. So we just got the main period, which is dry, very dry in Brazil. So we wouldn't get the natural process. And that was represented 23% of land use change emissions. So basically, if we account for forest fires in 2023, we would have an increase of 23% of land use emissions. But this is not part of our national inventory. IPCC doesn't account for forest fire emissions. And these are the new numbers were released yesterday of forest fires in 2024. So those are very brand new numbers. So in Brazil, we have 27 million hectares burned in 2024 from January to October. Most of what was burned was native vegetation in several forms, forest, savanna, and grassland, so 20.2 million hectares. But 27%, which is 7.7 million hectares, were forests alone. I mean, it's very common to see this high percentage of native vegetation burning in Brazil, but they are mostly grasslands or savannas. So what called the attention is that lots of forests were burned. So 50% of total native vegetation was forest fires, and 90% in Brazil, and 90% was forest fires in the Amazon. So that is would increase that number that I showed before by a lot. We basically had an increase of 5.7 times the area burned in forests in Brazil this year compared to last year. And the year hasn't finished yet. We still have fires going on in Brazil, and 60.2 times increase in the Amazon. So you can see very clearly how that evolved in the graphs on the right side, left side, I guess, left side. Yeah. So and that's a major concern. So next year, when we release SAG, probably we'll have a reduction in emissions, but we won't be accounting that type of emissions, which unfortunately, with the scenario of climate change, we probably we will face these scenarios more often. And now I'm going to give the floor to Gabriel. Thank you.
Thank you, Annie. Following for the agriculture sector, that's inside of the affluent sector that were brought the numbers to the NDC from proposals for OCs. Here we have to consider it that we have to look for not just the source of emissions for the sector, but also for the emissions that's not nowadays not accounted in the inventory. Also, the mitigation that we have made the proposal for the reductions, especially of methane, and also the sources of removal, especially in the soil from the agriculture and managed lands. Looking for the gross emissions in 2023 to 23, the 80% of all emissions of the sector were related to livestock production. And in the other side, the rest of those emissions, 20%, was related with agriculture emissions. So this projection, we have used the data from the map from Ministry of Agriculture in Brazil, what expected to the growth in the production from the biggest commodity products in Brazil, like soybean, sugarcane, the main products for agriculture, the main products like beef cattle, dairy, swine, beef from the livestock production. So using this data as active data and using the most recent national inventory with emission factors, we could project the emissions for the sector to 2035, where we are reaching something close more than 751 million tons of CO2 equivalent. So together with that, in our calculations, we are considering also the soil, emissions from the soil, where it was the emission was that reported would be something more than 28 millions of tons of CO2 equivalent. Also, we counted for the emissions that can be avoided and reduced, especially for the solutions that are going to bring soon. And with that, we are counting also the removals from the soil. With more, we could achieve more than 561 million of tons of CO2 equivalent. All of that, we could achieve net emissions for the sector in 2035, something close to 210 million of tons of CO2 equivalent. It's a reduction of more than 50% compared to the numbers of the sector in 2005. Following to the next slide, we can see this trajectory along the years, where we have this important way to look for not just for source of emissions, but also consider the whole system as agriculture can be made in Brazil. It's a barrier nowadays, such as the inventory just counts for gross emissions, and we are in touch with them, trying to look for all of these options that is important for the sector, because being one of the main economic sectors for Brazil, gets opportunity just not to count for the emissions, but also be part of the solution when we start increasing the removals from the soil, and also be showing your part of mitigation, especially with other GHG gases, where we are reducing them. So that's the both trajectories that we can achieve. In this blue one, it's what we have been proposing on LCs and DCs. For us to reach these numbers, we have to consider that nowadays Brazil have more than 100 millions of hectares in somehow degraded pastures. Somehow these areas with low efficiency and low productivity, with less than 1 cattle by hectare, they are not part of the solution. They are main sources of carbon soil emissions, and all these proposals that we're bringing here are considering the additional areas, considering that just from this 100 million hectares could be changed for the systems with low emissions productions. So a good example here is the additional recovery pasture degraded pasturelands, where inside these 100 million hectares, 22.5 million hectares can be allocated to recovery of these lands. Also, additionally, we have 18 million hectares of implementation of integrated production systems, such as integrated crop, livestock, and forest systems, together with 1 million of agroforest systems. So what you're taking here is deciding what these areas that nowadays represents a huge part of the area of the country could be part of the solution, especially considering that they have the potential to store soil carbon. And at the same time, the biggest part of this practice contributes to methane reduction, especially. A good example of that is the pasture, degraded pastures that become recovery pastures that at the same time they can allow a more quantity and volume of food with not attending the nutritious way of these animals in the livestock production. Other examples of that is planted forests, the expansion of that agriculture sector also, especially if no-tillage practice, being the main practice in this kind of area, and also the intensive termination, where we are reducing the time of the beef cattle, the cattle in the pasturelands, reducing so the methane emissions, and this is according. It's a strategy that's good for global methane pledge, where Brazil has assigned the COP from Glasgow. Together with that, we also brought some of the strategies is a key for the sector, but we not brought some numbers for that. That's because it's hard to monitor. We have to make some advances for reaching those numbers, but they are a key factor for achieving all of the social, economical, and environmental impact for the sector. Being part of the solution, not just part of the emissions, especially thinking about mitigation together with adaptation. So I can see it here, some kind of related with cattle farm. It likes the promotion of early slaughtering, improvement of manipulation of animal diet, also improving the genetics of these animals. In the agriculture sector, you can propose some kind of elimination of burning areas. As Ana has said, Brazil this year and last years has been on fire, literally, and also brought some numbers in the last collection of SEG. The burning of pastures that they stay as pastures after the burning. And we also have methane and nitrous oxide emissions that has not been counted in these inventories. In the last public collection of SEG, this data going to be updated also. We also have to promote the use of precision agriculture, rethinking the way how we are using, especially those sources of nitrogen that comes from fossil fuels. Using biological nitrogen fixation, for example, and think how to promote how the assistance to the small farmers, to every type of farmers, can brought us to the use of these technologies, process, and products with low emissions. And a part that's fundamental for all of this is a transversal talk and include the way how you see food systems in all value chains, thinking about how this is related with climate justice and equity, accessing the ways to guarantee not just a good production, but also food security and food sovereignty, thinking not just the commodity production, but food production also. Don't know. Uh-oh. Spoiler. Yeah. Here. And comparing with the NDC that Brazil has launched last week, we have some main strategies that must be taken in account. One of that is for the agricultural sector plan, it must have a map road, define the specific goals that must achieve. Here we has brought some areas, some numbers that can define the way where it can reach those numbers, and it's important for productivity, efficiency, and promoting low emissions agriculture. Other key aspect is for transparency of these assumptions. We are using the best data that we have nowadays, the best emission factors, the most up-to-date removal factors that can rely on how we are doing this. So this is important step for us measuring and bring those numbers, especially when I'm talking about these removals from soil carbon. Another fundamental part is how the national policies are related with these plans. So we have ABC Plus plan, a plan for to promote and scale up agriculture with low emissions activities, systems, and products. So how these erratic systems plans are related with the commitments that were made in the assuming our NDC and the governmental NDCs. So guaranteed implementation, how we're scaling up, how we're monitoring these product systems. It's fundamental for the sector for us to understand how they can be calculated and estimated for our commitments. So next, at this moment, I'm gonna give the speech to David.
Hello. Okay. Thank you, Gabriel. I'll try to be quick here because this was not originally planned in the panel, but just to close this part of the mitigation discussion, we wanted to share a little bit of the quick analysis on the Brazilian NDC that we conducted last week as the Brazilian government submitted its official NDC to the UNFCCC. So we did a little bit of the comparison on our numbers to the Brazilian NDC, and we wanted to bring some questions that we have. So this graph again, we look at the green line is the historical emissions in Brazil. We are departing from 1.6 gigatons of CO2 in 2023. And then what we just showed to you was the Climate Observatory's proposal, which is the dotted orange line below that gets to 0.2, that's 200 megatons in 2035. But to compare that with the official NDC, we adapted that target trajectory as an adaptation of the scope so that we account for protected areas and don't account for soil and the carbon. And we get that adapted target of 0.4. So 0.4 would be the number that, using the government's methodology, we could achieve by following all of the Climate Observatory's vision. And the black lines and dots, they are the Brazil's official NDC targets. So we see there's a target for 2025, 1.32, a target for 2030, 1.20. Those targets have not changed in this recent submission. And the novelty is that range from 1.05 to 0.85 for the year 2035 that the Brazilian government submitted as the new target. The graph shows clearly that that trajectory is way above what could be achieved by applying measures of mitigation. And we also did this, build this scenario where we show if current pledges and policies were followed, we would already be reaching 0.64 gigatons of CO2. So that's already below the lower limit of the target that was proposed last week. And just to exemplify the question, an open question that this leaves us, we did this exercise. So what does this range of 850 to 1050 megatons of CO2 mean? As it's written in the NDC, interpreting what's written in the NDC, so if land use change and forestry emissions goes according to current pledges, which are zeroing deforestation and recovering areas according to the National Plan on the Recovery of Vegetation, PLANAVEG, we would start on the graph on the left side. We would start with a negative budget already of emissions, which is a very advantageous point for Brazil. We would start with more than 700 million tons of negative emissions. And with that, how much emissions would fit in that budget of 850 and more than 1,000 megatons? If we sum up all the other sectors, which is the graph on the right, we see that we are departing from 1.234. And what would still fit in that budget would be between 1.78 and 1.58, which the graph shows that is an increase in the emissions. And it's an increase faster than the historical speed of growth of those other sectors. So we are talking about agriculture, energy, industrial process, and waste, which are typically increasing according to the economy. But we need to curb emissions in all of the sectors. And what the NDC is showing us is that it's allowing for an even faster rate of growth for these sectors. So we did also the other way around. So what would happen if the other sectors would follow a tendential scenario, which would mean increasing emissions on agriculture, increasing a little bit less on energy, a little bit of reducing emissions on the waste sector because it already has policies to curb methane emissions and increased industrial processes, and how much deforestation it would that cap of emissions would allow us to have. And we don't have the graph here, but we have on the technical note that's referenced below in the slide. It would mean approximately between 5,000 and 10,000 square kilometers of deforestation. So that's our open question. And with that, I'll leave the floor to Jarê.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Jarê. I came from a riverside indigenous community at the Cuieiras River in the state of Amazonas in Brazil. I'm a transgender indigenous young, and I'm also the executive director of Engajamundo Youth Association. And I came here to talk about climate justice. And so I didn't bring any numbers to show you, but it was a choice because I came here to talk about people. The numbers obviously are important, but it's not the center. And when I think about what is an ambitious NDC, the first thing that comes into my mind is who we are talking about. It's ambitious for the government, it's ambitious for the people, and ambitious for whom? For example, for us young people, and they see that don't include us, they don't talk about young people, they don't talk about children, will never be ambitious. You can put all the numbers there and it won't be ambitious. Ambitious is an NDC that speaks about the importance of the demarcation of indigenous and quilombolas lands. Because without that, we will never reduce deforestation and we will never have our forests and our territories protected. And ambitious NDC, it's an NDC that includes racial marks and gender marks and age marks. Because it's unrealistic to think that only by reducing deforestation will be pioneers or some kind of it in the fight against the climate crisis. Because we are dying. We are dying every day because of it. And there's no way to imagine a future that don't have adaptation in the center of political and government decisions. We don't have any time to think about some future that don't include people in all decisions. They don't have full social participation at all levels. And it was what we done in this NDC. We unit some NGOs in Brazil, like Engajamundo, like the Institute of Black Women Galades, like Peripheral Connection, like APIB, that is the most important indigenous movement in Brazil. And we talk about that. We talk about our perspectives. We talk about the importance that when we talk about mitigation or when we talk about adaptation, the importance to have marks and indicators and goals specifically that talk about race, that talk about gender, that talk about age. And it works. I think that's the most difference against our NDCs and the Brazilian NDCs. The Brazilian NDCs don't talk about young people, don't talk about children, and don't talk really much about race, about gender. And it didn't work because we need to consider the multiple realities that we have in our countries, in every countries. Specifically when we're talking about the climate crisis, because there's someone holding the fall of the sky with their own hands. We are holding the fall of the skies with our hands every day. We are daily surviving the results of a climate crisis that you caused, and we need to be listened. We need to be heard. So listen. There's no climate justice without racial justice. There is no climate justice without gender equality. And there is no ambitious NDC without climate justice. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Jarê. Now, Alexandre, please. It's with you.
So, good night, everyone. I am the last, so the last from now and to the end of this 10 crazy days that I've been here. So I will be just considering that before to start to thank you for you all to be here, and it's very, very late. Thank you, Climate Observatory, and all our friends here. We are from different institutions. We are together since 2003, I think, so more than 20 years. And it's very, very nice to work as a network where we work as a team. It's very, very nice. So thank you to being together. So my part is I don't know, is the more difficult one, but I'm just say this is about the money, how we can implement all this that we are trying to find the ways. We can discuss about mitigations and adaptation, but now what about the money? This is the question for this COP2, and what we said at our 2 or 3 months to study and to try to make proposals that we can present some ideas and some asks. So the first one is that our NDC from Climate Observatory is unconditional. So Brazil could deliver what we are saying, our mitigations, our actions for just transition unconditionally. Without thinking in other loopholes like carbon market and so on. So it's unconditional. The first point of us is about the money to end the deforestation. As we know, with the highest emissions from Brazil, everyone say that here. So how much we need to end the deforestation in the whole country? From the Amazon, Brazilian Cerrado, Pantanal, Caatinga, so all biomes that we have in Brazil. We don't know. In fact, we don't know. We don't know the number. How much will come from the government? How much will come from financial commitments from other countries, like Amazon Fund, something like that? But in fact, we don't know the whole number to end the deforestation in Brazil. Other points that we can say is about how can Brazil should present an NDC linking the money, the funds, with the targets. From now on, Brazil will go more deeply in sectors, as we know, our climate plan. So how much will cost Brazil to make the transition away from fossil fuel? How much will cost for Brazil to deliver just transition or adaptation or its sectors that we have? And so this is something that we ask Brazil to do it in the next 12 months until COP30. Of course, one important thing that we have is the discussions about subsidies. To make the NDC as an investment plan, we have just three ways. One is carbon pricing. So carbon pricing could be carbon market or tax. And Brazil just approved our carbon market law as a national carbon market law, and it's not too good as was possible to make. So, but of course, it's there. But we are not discussing about tax. Should we have taxes in the cattle farms, for instance, or sectors that are not in our carbon market? So this is one question that we have, as is the one way that we can finance our NDC. And the second one is about subsidies. And Brazil, we are doing our discussion there about our tax reform system. And one good point for us that Brazil must attack in the first moment as I forget the name. So it's a good opportunity is to end the subsidies for fossil fuel. We have near $15 billion per year to subsidies just for fossil fuel sector and share between production and consume. So Brazil should attack that. We are saying that we need money to make the NDC as investment plan. One part of the money could be from the end of the subsidies. And the third one is investment. And I believe that Brazil government is still doing something good. We are discussing there our taxonomy, so green taxonomy. That's very good. Not say that I think that I agree with everything that is there, but even the discussions and to have the hard line, the frontiers that what we're gonna be a green taxonomy in Brazil is so good. And the third one is about the second one is Brazil launched this year the sustainable funds, the first one. That's too good too. It's a very good signals, and in fact now part of this money goes to climate fund, and will support our activities, for instance, to recover degraded lands and degraded pasture. That we, of course, is in our NDC too. And the third one that's just launched this year, it is the de-risking program with IDB to the risk, especially the problem with the hedge and the currency difference that we have in Brazil, the currency risk that we have in Brazil. So I think that with that is the starting point. And what we are saying here in our NDC from civil society, that Brazil is doing a lot, even to decrease the deforestation rate. But as we see, Brazil launched last year the discussion about Mission 1.5. We really agree with that. And we just say, we are showing and trying, provoking our government, say that it's possible. We believe on that. We need to have that. We need to have a government that really believe in 1.5, and we are showing that we can do it together with them. So is that. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Now we will open to questions. Please, we have microphone. Yes, thank you. Here.
Yeah, hello, Fiona Ryan from Forest Development and Climate. I actually haven't seen the Brazilian NDC, but I imagine it has a 2035 target like everyone else. The global stocktake last year, I mean, Brazil's one of the first NDCs, so it's setting us pattern for other countries. The global stocktake said last year that countries should reset their 2030 targets in their coming NDCs to meet the 1.5 degree global target. So, yeah, and leaving it to 2035, 2030 was supposed to be the end of the critical decade for climate action. I shouldn't laugh. And 2030, so delaying it 5 years is 2035. I mean, the 2035 I've seen WRI and UNEP have recommended a 42% reduction of 2019 levels, 42%. And yeah, so I think that's the target countries should be heading for, and a 2030 target. And UNEP says it'll be less cost if we start early and go for the 2030 target rather than because if we don't have a enhanced 2030 target, we'll have to make a stronger 2035 target to meet the 1.5 degrees climate, the temperature goal.
Thank you. Please.
Hi, good evening. My name is Taroshi and I'm with the Asia Pacific Broadcasting Union. My question to you would be, so this year, COP29, we call it the Finance COP. And there are some talks that COP30 in Brazil will be called the Nature COP. From what we hear, the government is not very happy with it being dubbed as the Nature COP. What is your stance? What do you think?
Any? Should we get more questions or just, I mean, I can comment on that. Sure. Okay, I'll comment. I start commenting and I think others can comment as well. I think it's, I mean, we all have hopes for COP30 in Belém. And in fact, it has been seen as the COP, the Forest COP or the Nature COP. And we think that's a good name for it, but we shouldn't forget about the fossil fuels, which are our main villain here. And in fact, if Brazil continues the pace in which it is in terms of reducing deforestation, which is the main source of greenhouse gas emissions, we will get to the COP30 with very good results. Although, as I showed, the forest fires and the impact of forest fires are not in this account. So we hope that for next year we don't have the same situation in which we are facing. Even and it needs to be clear that forest fires in Brazil, in fact, are mostly anthropogenic. So it's caused by humans, which is different in most part of the world. In the Amazon mainly, it's 100% caused by humans. So it doesn't matter if it's very dry or not, we will always have fire, and we are, how can I say, degrading the forest in a way that we won't need a very dry period to have a forest fire, because the forest has been degraded already. Part, not all, please. Just part of the forest has been degraded. So in that way, in that sense, I think it's very important that Brazil keeps the message and keep doing what it's doing in terms of reducing deforestation, but also like holding forest fires and not being controversial in not giving like a wrong or controversial message in terms of fossil fuels. So I think those, I mean, for Brazil to arrive at COP30 in a good condition, we do need to do that, like continue stopping deforestation, like stop forest fires, and don't go for fossil fuels.
Connecting with this part that you has mentioned about financing, for agriculture sector is crucial. The financing be arrived at all of the kinds of production systems, especially for those small ones, small farmers, small holders, the local communities that are part of this sector. It's a key part of this solution for scale up all of those process of low emissions. The financial resources that we need to the sector, they need to direct it, they need to provide mitigation adaptation, not just for rural insurance. That's not adaptation, that's just a little part of the solution. So it's important for plans that you have, like plan Safra plan, where a little part of that is for ABC's plan. It becomes the biggest part of finance in Brazil, and together with that, we start monitoring and guaranteeing that all of this is resulting in changes in the field, a phase out of how we're doing agriculture, reaching a way of all of these better options of soil management, improved products, become the normal for the sector.
I would like to comment a little bit on the 2030, 2035 question on the target for 2030. Our NDC, the Climate Observatory's NDC, is very aligned to your thought on that. We are proposing a steep decrease, a fast decrease of emissions, faster, in fact, from now to 2030, and then a slower from 2035. Also because there is a low-hanging fruit, which is curbing deforestation. The last year of the SIG's data collection has showed that with enforcement controls on deforestation, we can lower the emissions very fast. So that's one thing that Brazil could contribute to mitigate faster than other countries. And so that's also why we proposed a much lower cap of emissions in 2030 compared to the official NDC. So yes, we also believe that we can go faster until 2030.
More questions, please? I think he first. Okay. Okay. If you want.
Okay. My name is Paige Stevens. I'm a student at Indiana University. And my question is, what do you think the biggest challenge Brazil is facing or will face in the next year leading up to COP30? and what needs to be done to address that challenge?
I think that's we can do the 3 questions, okay? And the others.
My question is very specific. I think here Gabriel can respond. I think that Brazil intends, at least I understood this from the works on the climate plan, to count the removals from agricultural soils, depending on what's done, isn't it? They have established a commission to study removals between for the official inventory.
Thank you very much. Given we have international audience here, would you please go further on the discretion that you made, like within the agriculture sector, you divided the emissions with soil emissions and production emissions. Would you please go further on what is considered production emissions within the Brazilian profile of agriculture?
I think that Gabriel starts, and after we pass to Alexandre.
Yeah, perfect. I'm going to start with these specific questions for agriculture sector. Nowadays, the national inventory, that's huge for our Brazilian science. It's made from the last inventory, from the 3rd to the 4th. We have made a huge developments in the methodology. It's a great job for science ministry. And with the national science, we can provide better emission factors and better data for decision makers. So all of them SEG methodology follows the same methodology as national inventories has made. But we are also considering these aspects as looking for the whole agricultural system, looking not just for the source of emissions, but also for the removal sources. And the biggest source, the biggest pool for agricultural sector is the soil. So considering the source of emissions from the soil, we also have emissions that are being counted. We also have the part of the removals. So when I was saying that we have to, our commitments in the NDCs, or says NDCs, is to recover pasture lands, increase areas with integrated crop, livestock, and forest systems, agroforest systems, no-tillage with agriculture. All of these ways of managing soil and the agricultural lands, they have a result in the balance, the carbon balance from the agriculture sector. So this is what we are considering. And this is one of the key aspects that we brought her with clear methodology and all the considerations that nowadays we not have a clear roadmap as the government NDCs has been proposing. So this is a missed opportunity to show the assumptions that they have made to bring those numbers. And this is important because when you're talking about this agenda for the agriculture sector, it's a development agenda. It's not. It shouldn't be seen as some kind of limitation. Otherwise, this should be considered an opportunity for the sector because we can produce with reduction of emissions, with mitigation, and part of the solutions of mitigation also brings back guarantee adaptation for the systems. For no doubt, when the yellow part of this graph, like 750 millions of tons of CO2 equivalent, it's meaning this part is result from what happens inside of the farms. So here we are talking about all the agriculture sector production, all the herd of animals, how we are having managing soils, especially for nitrogen, synthetic fertilizers, liming, how the waste of our animal production has been managed and what kind of technologies we are using, all inside this yellow part of the graph. So looking for the part as a holistic system from the sector, we have also to consider the soils, the source of emission from the soil and removals also. So this is related just what happens inside of the farms.
Thank you, Alexandre, about the finance.
Not about finance. It's about COP30 expectations.
Sorry.
It's maybe 1 trillion answer for a question. That, of course, if you ask for everyone here, each one, we're gonna have a different opinion, I think. From my point of view, the first one is to agree that we have a multilateralism process. This is very, very important now. That's a signal that Brazil reached at G20, and we need to stay until COP30 that we believe in a multilateralism process. This is the first one. And the second one, I think it's a couple of course, NDCs, and how can we implement the NDCs? Implement the questions to end the deforestation, the questions to make the transition away from fossil fuel. So we can go sector by sector, discussions about just transition, gender, oceans, and so everything. We need to show and we need to deliver implementation. We don't have time, I know that. So in Brazil, need to leader on that. It's a COP that we need to deliver a climate finance on the ground. We need to deliver climate finance on the countries. And we need, again, deliver mission 1.5. This is, I think, that if we, at the end of the process, if we can have that we have a multilateralism, we have a world that we can live together, that we have cooperation between everyone, and a country that we can live for the next generations. You are younger than me, and I know that it's very important for everyone that we can deliver something that we agree it's possible to deliver during the next decades. This is, I think, that the expectations to Brazil, I know it's too high. We are crazy. Everyone expectation Brazil can do it. And of course, I believe that we need this. Thank you.
Jarê, please.
I'll talk a little about the challenge until COP30. I think the biggest challenge that we have is social participation. It's just listen what we talked today or look at the negotiations. We are advancing really slowly and we have no time to wait. Our government decides who will be there, who will participate, and who won't. And I'm not talking just about COP30, but all the steps until there. That's it. We have no time to wait, and our people need to be there. We need to look at the COP30 and we need to look at this and have Black and indigenous people there. We need to listen them, because if we won't, this will happen. Will happen in Brazilian NDC. And if we won't considering all the different realities, it didn't work. And that's it. I think the biggest challenge we have is to guarantee that who are most impacted by the climate crisis will be there.
I would also like to comment on one challenge that derives from our analysis, and actually it will be echoing a little bit of what Gabriel just said, is that the NDC has brought a new target for reducing emissions in 2035. It's some reduction. We showed here that we're not quite totally satisfied with the number, but it's some reduction. But we need to improve the mitigation planning in Brazil. So we need to break down that target into sectoral targets. so that we don't risk not complying to the deforestation commitment, deforestation control commitment, or we risk to allow for more emissions in the other sectors.
Thank you. We have more questions. We have 10 minutes, please.
Thank you. I would like to ask, just last week at the World Bank Pavilion, Madame Minister has just said that Brazil will open a carbon market. Do you have any idea, or just what is the expectation? And then what do you think this relation with the Article 6.4 that just the first day passed quickly? Thank you.
Okay, I'll answer that. So in our, as I said before, in our NDC, we say is unconditional. So we don't think in our NDCs as a group that Brazil should use carbon market. The second point about the 6.4, this is what's happened last week. I think, from my point of view, is that of course, in a procedural way, it was not illegal. It was not legal, but everyone accepted it. I am from Brazil. In Brazil, we make comparison every time with football, with soccer. And in a World Cup of 1986, Maradona did a hand goal. We call hand of God. The Argentina call that the hand of God. And everyone accepted it. Everyone saw that and accepted it. For me, it's like the same. Something that's not legal. It was the procedural legal, but the countries accepted. Every country is accepted, saying that's not going to happen again. And from another point of view, is that, okay, we have some questions here. We, as in our NDC, we don't want carbon market, but if Brazil could reach, for instance, in our proposal that we can be net zero in 2045, and Brazil can deliver much more from restoration, maybe we can use a voluntary market to support on that. This is a good point. Thank you.
More questions? It's the time. No? That's okay? Do you like to talk about some to finish it, or it's okay for you? So I think is see you in Belém.